if Russiagate was the beginning of it, now we're in a different phase, and things have accelerated dramatically. Really since 1/6, but even before that, and now, there's not even this necessity of linking things with Russia. Now, after 1/6, it's domestic terror, and you see various politicians trying to link narratively 1/6 with 9/11, with the implication that basically 74 million some Trump supporters should be treated as de facto terrorists or potential terrorists. And that represents a dramatic escalation in this pre-existing trend that, really the Russia hoax was the first major wave of. Now we have full-scale, basically, War on Terror 2.0, which, instead of the first War on Terror, which is, disastrous enough, now it's, starring you and 74 million other people like you as the potential domestic terrorists. And really, that's to contextualize it in terms of the bigger picture here. The national security apparatus, which has been, politicized and weaponized against the American people, there's a number of things going on. There's a complete kind of ideological consolidation going on, a purging, a vetting. And you see that with the 60-day military National Guard stand down that occurred after 1/6. You see dramatic, extreme vetting. We get extreme vetting, but it's not for potential terrorists coming into the country. It's for people in the defense sector who may harbor sympathetic views toward Trump or MAGA. That's the extreme vetting we actually get. And it's just getting started. It's really just getting started. And it's...
Dude, I remember... I'm sorry. I remember very clearly 9/11 time. And unfortunately, I've had a guest on this show who actually wrote some of these words I'm about ready to criticize. But I do remember very clearly them saying just these words smash, right? To get people associated, to associate certain ideas with certain events. They just be like 9/11, Saddam Hussein, Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein, 9/11, Al-Qaeda, Afghanistan, Iraq. And they would just mash them all up together in a way that there was just no way for the general public to really be able to understand what all those terms meant individually, what the relationships were to each other. And all you're left with is this notion that in the same bucket goes 9/11, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, all of that goes right together in one group. And that was very powerful. It was very convincing, and it was enough for us to send hundreds of thousands of troops over to the Middle East, occupy a foreign country, have millions of people die afterwards, destroy everything. That's how powerful those words are. And just standing in front of the American people and doing that word smash. We're seeing the word smash happen now. And just give a little bit more context, Darren, I'm going to turn it right back over to you.
You see the word smash happening, and so there's one dimension is this total ideological consolidation, the de-Trumpification, maybe even using post-war Germany as the analogy that they have in mind, a de-Trumpification of basically every institution, but in particular national security institutions, as a precondition perhaps for a much broader de-Trumpification of the country. So you have that, but you also have kind of the more boring but bottom line explanation is that a lot of this national security infrastructure that grew out of 9/11, DHS is a great example. DHS was birthed out of 9/11, and you have these huge bureaucracies with commensurately huge budgets, and they need some kind of justification for why the hell they're doing and why they're getting that money. Now, they can get some of that out of the Russia stuff. I happen to think that a lot of the China stuff happens to be just like the new national security grift. But the third component of that is this domestic war on terror. And in fact, there have been a lot of meetings and documents basically indicating that all these bureaucracies whole scale are being kind of repurposed in order to kind of accommodate that new function, that new imprimaturs. The DHS purpose now is to prosecute this domestic war on terror. So, and that's a justification for its continued existence and its continued budget. So, like with most of these things, rather than, I think, a kind of like conscious everyone sitting at the table conspiracies, which sometimes do happen, but in this case it's just kind of a conflation of an intersection of different interests. And
Totally.
one of those interests is the financial interests of these institutions to justify these continued budgets, and that's aligned with the kind of the political dimension of basically absolute full scale ideological consolidation. It's a remarkable thing to see, and it's actually astonishing to see how quickly things have moved in that direction just in the past, like just this year. Really, it's amazing, and I don't think it's going to slow down really.
I think you're right. It's really quick. It's scary because basically it makes you think what we might have made a really big mistake in kind of constantly being like, we don't want any more forever wars, because at least when we had the forever wars, they were aiming their budgets and their programs and their obsession with destruction and spending money elsewhere. Now they can't, they've got peace in the Middle East, so they got to come after us. So now we've really fucked up that one. But that may have been a massive mistake. But anyways, what you're saying is totally true. The mashup of words is absolutely happening again. And remember, back in the 9/11 mashup, what word was never used, which is crazy considering that most people forget that Osama bin Laden was a Saudi. So that was never one of the terms. But yeah, it's the exact people that created the Iraq War are the same people that are pushing this and are creating this domestic enemy fantasy. So, but yeah, anyway, that carry on, but that's absolutely what's happening.
It's terrifying to me. I remember watching that all happen and play out, and now there's another element to this, and I'm going to come back to you in a second, Darren, to talk about Sicknick and January 6th, because that's all part of this. But we have now been occupied in Iraq for 2 decades. We have a generation of warfighters who only know being an occupying force and dealing with counterinsurgents, right? Dealing with insurgents, rather, within their occupying territory. Well, what do we have here in the United States? I feel like we are living in an occupied territory. I feel like that our government has been hijacked by people that don't believe in the founding principles. And they now have an army and an apparatus that is specifically trained to root out insurgents. And we're turning that lens here on the United States. And I'm saying these people are practiced, proficient. There's theory, there's technique, there are tools, there are weapons, there are systems, there are approvals. They are trained to root out insurgents in the territory that they are occupying. And that is clearly what's happening here. And one of the ways that they do it is through an information war. And it started with the Russia, they took over the campaign or whatever, 2016. There was a whole bunch of other stuff that happened as well. The Russia bounty case, which is now completely fallen apart, right? Total bull. And there's January 6th, where now we're all being labeled as actual insurgents. And it was an attack, a lethal attack on the Capitol, the most egregious thing that could possibly ever happen.
It's the weapons of mass destruction. The Sicknick is the weapons of mass destruction of the January 6th hoax.
Indeed it is. So let's get into that. Darren, there was, at the time, on January 6th, I was on the streets in D.C. I remember the feeling and the energy. I didn't want to go to the White House. I knew bad things were happening. So I split after the speech. I went home and I watched everything that was happening. That day, there were reports of 4, 5, 6 people getting killed, right? Just murders and deaths everywhere. And one by one, those stories have fallen apart. And one of the most important ones is this one about Sicknick. Tell us what happened, Darren, and tell us how Revolver was involved in sort of bringing that information to light.
Yep. Happily will do so. Just a quick remark, I want to reinforce what you were saying a little bit earlier about basically what's happening is a counterintelligence operation effectively happening domestically on a broad scale. And there's actually one Revolver piece that comes to mind that I'd recommend to everyone. It's called FBI Deploys Creepy Sentiment Analysis Tools to Screen National Guard for Pro-Trump Sympathies. And it gets into this story, which is interesting in its own right, but toward the end, it develops this concept of, what originally we had American counterintelligence. Now we have what I'd call counter-American intelligence. And you see a lot of the key players in this are actually counter-intelligence operatives. And, you see them pop up in a number of these political controversies. The recent controversy surrounding Tucker Carlson, who criticized this obsession with transsexualism in the military, and he got in big trouble for that. And all of these official military accounts were jumping in the fray. You had, a ton of counterintelligence people in there, counterintelligence people from the FBI. So there are a number of people named in this piece that really underscore the weaponization of this specific discipline of intelligence as part of this broader weaponization of the national security state against MAGA, against Trump supporters. But at this stage, it's not even like Trump supporters just a convenient proxy. It's really against anyone who objects to this now popular term, the globalist American empire. Anyone who objects to the agenda, even on the left, people like Greenwald, people like the guys at the gray zone, they're in the same boat, at least with respect to this specific division, and they're all in the scopes of the censors and the counterintelligence operation. So that's kind of, I think, some important context. As for the Sicknick thing in 1/6, it's amazing and it's very important. And I really, the stakes are very high. So I have to kind of choose, pick what I say carefully, because it's now in a domain that can get very dangerous. So I'm trying to be careful about it. Not that, I think I'm going to get Terrence Yeekied. I hope not. But there's I think there's a lawfare dimension that I have to be sensitive to as well. So but just in terms of the bare bones of the Sicknick case is, the original Revolver.News story that exploded. The title I think is relevant to this, and the title was MAGA blood libel. And why is this a blood libel? It's a blood libel because Sicknick's death was used to characterize the protesters and the anyone adjacent to that as a murderer. And all of the headlines that you see, the deadly riots, the fatal riots, the murderous mob, all of those words were sitting on the back of this false narrative pertaining to the death of Officer Sicknick, who, by the way, from most accounts that I've seen, was actually a Trump supporter. And interestingly enough, there's an interesting dimension there, is from reports. I haven't, been able to confirm this with him or his family or anything, but or his friends, but there are reports that he's deeply critical of United States policy in the aftermath of 9/11 and the government's policy in the aftermath of 9/11. And so how remarkable that the national security state has tried to not only politicize his death, but to enmesh it into this narrative as the neo 9/11, where this guy himself was very critical of how the government used 9/11 as a pretext for a lot of dangerous and counterproductive and unethical things.